Any other comments or contributions from the floor? Yes.
Going back to the main question that's involved, specifically to James Arbuthnot, one of the big issues, of course, is MP's expenses. And I wonder if you'd like to just have a comment on your personal expenses, including your large gardening bill, and how you felt that was relevant to your job as an MP.
Yeah, certainly. It's a fair question, and I'm a little surprised it hasn't come up before now. Three things to say. First, when this hit the headlines, it made the country obviously extremely angry because nobody knew anything about it. And it was, that's not the reason it made people angry, but it did make people very angry. And it was utterly shocking at what most MPs had been doing and what I personally had been doing. You said that and it was because I was personally appalled at the way what I had done by way of expenses was perceived by my constituents, that I thought, this is awful. I must pay back the money. I must apologise. I think I was the first Member of Parliament to pay back any money, and I set what turned out to be the norm for payment back. But I think it is right in a meeting like this to repeat the apology I made then. That's the first thing. The second thing is, how did it arise in the first place? It arose because successive prime ministers of both parties had said that they could not accept the independent assessment of the amount which a Member of Parliament ought to be paid. And that meant that Members of Parliament's salary was held down below those independent assessments. But those Prime Ministers said, privately then not publicly, we will make it up by an over-generous expenses system. That included specifically gardening, oddly enough. Why it should be thought necessary to have your garden neatly mown in order to be a Member of Parliament, nobody is entirely clear. But that was one of the things for which the expenses were expressly set up. Not a good way of dealing with things, I accept that. Thoroughly bad, but that was the way it grew up. It became part of the package. And we treated it as part of the payment package. And finally, the thing I would say is, the most essential thing now is to have absolute openness, to deal with it in a way which independent assessors think is right and just. And that, I think, has begun to happen. It's still got some way to go, but I did think that David Cameron actually led the way in strong, firm, decisive, quite brave leadership in dealing with the expenses scandal, for scandal it was.
Any other questions from the floor, please? Yeah.
I'm a teacher, and I anticipate that the future government is probably going to put caps on the salaries for teachers and other public sector workers. If I was to augment my income by claiming additional miles and trips I might do in college business, I would be regarded as embezzling.
Yes. That was not something I ever did.
Barry Jones,
yes, I thought that there were some pretty awful examples of abuse of the system, but I also was looking at the context. There seemed to me to be a number of what people have done is just, I can claim 20,000, I'll just find whatever receipts I can, because that had become custom and practice. It certainly wasn't ideal custom and practice, it had become custom and practice. To me, 20,000 actually wasn't a huge sum to be claiming for expenses for a second home, because for a number of years I had a couple of members of my team who were living in a 4-star hotel 5 nights a week and commuting 100 miles away each weekend. And over the year, that actually did add up to more than £20,000. But when I was working in the local elections last year, I was talking to people in some of the social housing in Aldershot, and I realised that to them, £20,000 a year was an aspiration they were never likely to achieve. And for them, it was really horrifying. There were people who lived in social housing who put a huge amount of work and their own money into making their houses really pleasant, their gardens beautiful. And they knew that if the housing association decided that they wanted to redevelop their area, all they would get would be a £4,000 displacement payment. They would get nothing for all the work they'd done. And so for them, the MPs getting the benefit of the betterment that the government had paid for was also a horrifying thing. So it was actually talking to ordinary people that made me realise how bad it was. So to me, the sums were not particularly scary until I looked at it through someone else's eyes.
Sorry, just want to add. I mean, James knows my views on this. I feel that James should have resigned over this, like many of his colleagues did. To claim expenses for things that are not essential for your job, in my view, was indefensible, and of course was one of the motivations why I put myself up for election as well, because honestly, I look forward to a House of Commons where there are